For 30 years, FBI agents stood in American courtrooms and told juries, with the confident cadence of trained scientists, that a single hair found at a crime scene matched a defendant. That claim was presented as certainty, not opinion. It was not true. The microscopic technique those examiners described was never scientifically validated. In 2015, the FBI and Department of Justice released an audit of 268 cases. 95% contained testimony that was scientifically unsupported or plainly wrong. Those errors were not isolated slips, they formed a pattern. Examiners routinely overstated the probative value of hair comparisons in ways that favored the prosecution. Investigators identified roughly 2,500 cases that might have been affected. Of those, 32 defendants had been sentenced to death. 14 of them had already been executed before the review began. The files show supervisors reviewed and approved testimony later judged unreliable. For decades, the courts were fed testimony that presented subjective judgment as if it were indisputable science. The method was simple in description and perilous in application. An examiner would place hairs under a microscope, compare color, diameter, medullary patterns, and other visual features, and conclude the hairs were consistent with one another. Language heard by juries as a match. Some examiners went further, offering statistical claims. 1 in a million, indistinguishable from, implied probabilities with no empirical basis. There was no population database, no validated protocol to convert microscopic similarity into a meaningful probability. Instead, examiners relied on their experience and often on intuition to assign numbers. Michael Malone, a prominent FBI hair examiner, testified in hundreds of cases over more than 20 years. An internal inspector general review in 1997 found Malone had fabricated evidence, committed perjury, and given testimony that lacked scientific support. The Bureau removed him from casework, but did not notify the defendants. He had helped convict or review those convictions. Years later, a broader audit revealed that Malone's conduct reflected widespread practices across the unit, not an isolated deviance. Those systemic failures had human consequences that are difficult to quantify. Kirk Odom spent 22 years in prison for a rape he did not commit. The verdict relied in part on FBI testimony that Odom's hair was consistent with hair on the victim. Later DNA testing excluded him and identified the true source. Sante Tribble served 28 years for a murder before DNA revealed that a hair the FBI examiner had sworn was human and consistent with Tribble actually came from a dog. Donald Gates lost 28 years to a conviction shaped by the same kind of testimony. All three were exonerated only after DNA testing, pursued by innocence organizations. Appeals courts had deferred to the experts. Judges had treated their assertions as authoritative. The mechanism was tragically uniform. A man in a suit with FBI credentials told a jury that science had identified the defendant. The jury believed him. Appellate review often accepted the testimony without demanding the underpinning science. At roughly 70% through the public accounting of this scandal came the most damning admission. Supervisors had not merely overlooked questionable methods. They had reviewed and signed off on the testimony, now known to be unreliable, allowing it to carry the full weight of federal authority into trials that determined life and death. The institutional response was partial and uneven. The FBI's 2015 statement acknowledged the breadth of the problem, but stopped short of assigning individual blame for living examiners. It prompted a notification program to alert defendants whose convictions might be tainted. Yet the program depended on state cooperation, and many jurisdictions declined full participation. As publicly reported, fewer than half of affected defendants had been notified. The National Commission on Forensic Science, which aimed to set standards for hair analysis and other forensic methods, was disbanded in 2017 before completing its work. Federal courts no longer accept microscopic hair comparison as standalone evidence. Some state courts still do. The 14 people executed while the FBI had internal knowledge that its hair testimony was unreliable cannot be restored, notified, or reviewed. If you believe a government agency that discovers its own experts produced unreliable testimony has an obligation to correct the record, especially when that testimony sent people to prison and in some cases to death, subscribe to Case Files TV.